This government is off to the worst start of any government since Eden and the Suez Crisis in 1956. They are collapsing in terms of support. Reform really are now the party of working people.
The party of working people, says the former city slicker. It's always been a bit of a contradiction from Nigel Farage that he has this appeal among the working class. Robert and Harry are here with me to discuss all of this. Robert, I'll start with you. I mean, what did you make of Nigel Farage's appeal here? We shouldn't be surprised by it, of course. But do you think that this is where the direction of politics is heading now, this battleground between Reform UK and Labour over who speaks to working people?
Well, it's obviously part of the story. I mean, I suppose what I felt more generally when watching Farage, quite apart from the fact that he is so much more at ease with himself when delivering a long speech of that sort, but I thought the main thing that struck me is he has a story to tell about the future of Britain. And I'm afraid to say he has a story to tell in a way that, at the moment, the British Prime Minister doesn't really have a story to tell, and the leader of the Tories, Kemi Badenoch, doesn't really have a story to tell. And, this is not to suggest that their extraordinary rise will go on, and it's also not to suggest that there aren't tremendous flaws and contradictions in many of his policies. But I was struck that he is positioning himself not just as the party of, I suppose in another era would have been called the strivers, but also, and this is something I've sort of been intrigued by, has been missing from British politics for years, he is positioning Reform as the party of the family. Another policy that he announced in that speech was that he was going to make tax allowances transferable between husbands and wives, because at the moment, if you earn a certain amount of money divided between two partners, as opposed to just one partner earning the same amount of money, then there are some sort of weird implications for the take-home pay of the whole family, and he thinks he basically wants to encourage people to have families. And as I understood it, it would mean that, for example, a non-working husband or a non-working wife would be able to transfer their implicit tax, the tax-free amount that they would be allowed to their partner, so they would be as well off as a couple with two earners. And these are policies that, I'm not going to make a judgment whether they're good or bad, but they'll certainly appeal to lots of people.
And Robert, part of these sort of pro-family policies, I think, are kind of a hark back to Thatcherism. She put a lot of emphasis on the family unit as opposed to society as a whole. But also, Harry, it does feel like echoes of the American right as well. And this sort of move towards pronatalism, for example, if you're not familiar with that, of course, it's this idea that population rates are dropping across the world in Western societies. We need to be having more children in order to populate the country, particularly for British people to have kids rather than to rely on immigration to sort out our ageing population and all the other challenges that come with it. So it does feel as though Nigel Farage is kind of tapping into some of that as well with what he's saying.
Well, I think he's leaning into what he feels is the sweet spot of being to the right on social issues and then being to the left on economic issues. And like you say, we've seen it in America with Donald Trump in particular. That sort of platform seems to work at the moment in lots of Western democracies, that sort of populist position. It worked for Boris Johnson, arguably. He was right wing on some social issues and quite left wing on economics. And Nigel Farage and Reform think that is a formula for them to do well over the next few years. We saw Keir Starmer a couple of weeks ago when he was addressing his MPs. He told them that he thought Nigel Farage was going to be the main opposition in the next few years. And Nigel Farage, fresh from his holiday last week, basically said yesterday, look, bring it on. This is a fight I'm more than willing to have, and it's classic sort of smart politics from Farage. He knows that those issues, the 2-child benefit cap, the winter fuel allowance, are both issues that the Labour government is slowly in the process of changing its position on, and he's just getting ahead of them so he can say in 3 months' time, look, I got there first. I put pressure on you, and he forced them to do it. So it's classic sort of smart politics for an opposition party, and I suppose it's interesting that Nigel Farage has got there first or made more of a big deal of it than Kemi Badenoch, who is, of course, the official leader of the opposition.
Harry, the point I was going to make with you as well is that this is something the Lib Dems used to do, wasn't it? Where they'd come up with a really eye-catching policy, and they didn't always, in the kind of 90s and noughties, have the same level of scrutiny as Labour and the Conservatives face. So they could come up with policies that sounded great and then sort of get away with not having to cost them and explain them. What did you make of the costings that Nigel Farage came up with yesterday? Because he had some quite big numbers, didn't he, that he said he was going to cut from the budget to make way for these policies?
Yeah, I can hear Robert chuckling away in the background there. Look, to an extent, we're 3-4 years away from an election, so making things add up is not a huge priority, I suppose, at this stage. The cuts that Nigel Farage was proposing to net zero, to DEI policies, where he thinks he's going to get a bulk of these savings from, I think they're highly questionable. One of the things I find quite interesting is the platform that Reform stood on at the last election, their contract, as they called it. They've pretty much disowned already. If you bring it up in interviews with Nigel Farage or Richard Tice, the Reform Party leader, they sort of say, oh, well, that was just a document that we wrote 18 months ago. We're a very different party nowadays. So, they are going to have to get a lot more serious with their costings if they think that they are going to be on the cusp of government in a few years' time. But at this stage, setting out these sort of broad sort of priorities, their sums. I think they can afford to be a bit looser with their sums at this stage. But yeah, I mean, huge question marks about how they're going to pay for all these things.
And Robert, I mean, look, just to be clear, I mean, Harry is being. I don't know whether it's kind or just not. I mean, their costings are a joke. I mean, the notion that they're going to save significant sums. I mean, the billions that Nigel Farage talked about from abolishing diversity, equity, and inclusion. Officers and goals within the public sector. If it saves a few hundred million, they'd be lucky. Similarly, I don't think they understand. I genuinely don't think they understand the real costs of moving to net zero, because apart from anything else, they completely discount the benefits of being, as an economy, way less dependent on the volatile and periodically incredibly expensive gas price. So all of that is just ludicrous economics. And then just one other point, Harry, may be right that they've disowned quite a lot of what was in their manifesto, but they continue to talk about the goal. I think I'm certain Farage did it yesterday, of increasing the tax-free allowance to £20,000 per person. The cost of that would be, I mean, it's tens and tens of billions of pounds. And, obviously, unless and until they come up with something more credible, the only way that they would be able to pay for that without essentially putting themselves in a Liz Truss position of being unable to borrow would be to reduce public spending by absolutely astonishing amounts. So they're nowhere near. I mean, as I say, they politically, in terms of telling this story to the nation that appears to resonate with lots of people, they're very sophisticated. They're pretty impressive. Economically, they're not remotely a serious party yet, but as Harry says, they've got some time.